foreign policy is extremely complicated, so everyone has a lot of opinions, but very often they're not operating with a ton of facts, which is why I'm very pleased to bring on retired Brigadier General Blaine Holt. He is an Operation Enduring Freedom veteran, C-17 commander, tech entrepreneur, and co-founder of Restore Liberty. General Holt, thank you for coming on.
Pleasure to be here with you, Michael. Thank you.
I am so pleased that someone who has any knowledge about this situation whatsoever can help to clear things up a little bit. I'll ask it very simply. Do with it what you will. What is going on in Ukraine?
Yeah, so right now, Ukraine is, if you are a Ukrainian, you're very nervous about the events that you see going forward because you're being ringed in by Russian forces at a much higher level than what we've seen over the past 4 months. And honestly, it's been like a very slow-moving train wreck where it's just like it was back when I was at European Command and we watched Crimea fall apart. We saw this for weeks. And the Ukrainian today is saying, what is going to happen to my country? And then you wake up and you find out that Germany and America are starting to pull people out of their embassies. It's not a very huge confidence building step. And you also understand that there is a lot of geopolitical issues, including interplay between the administration in the legal court system of Kiev. And you must wonder what the motives are of anyone on the big power map as you make plans to either flee the country, become part of a massive refugee crisis, or hunker down and hope for the best.
So just a little brief recent history of Ukraine. Ukraine has not been an independent nation for very long. It previously was part of the Soviet Union, but it's been dominated by lots of other powers in history. Tsarist Russia, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Even the Poles managed to conquer Ukraine. And if Putin has his way, Ukraine will not remain a sovereign state for much longer. So for the average American who's looking at this situation and doesn't probably care all that much, why does it matter to us that Ukraine remain an independent nation?
Yeah, so the history is exactly right. This is where the world comes to fight wars. And we can go from the Mongol hordes to today. But the reason that Ukraine matters is because of the bigger prize for Putin. I mean, everybody understands they would like to reestablish what they had for buffer states. There is nothing that works for Russia in having a thriving, economically vibrant Ukraine on their border. But it's NATO cohesion itself and it's NATO unity itself that is the prize here if you're Russia and you start to divide things up. If you look back at what happened in Afghanistan, those are very clear signals that NATO unity did not exist as the haphazard, disastrous way that we left. And so one knew right then that other powers in the world would start to test the resolve of NATO and the United States and their foreign policy. And I think my own personal opinion is that's why you see Russia knocking on the doors of the Ukraine, economically trying to draw a wedge between the EU countries and the NATO countries as they go forward.
Now, what is Ukraine's status with regard to NATO and the EU? Because they're not officially in NATO or the EU, but they have very close relations and they're kind of edging in that direction. So where does that stand?
So there's two classifications in the NATO club. You're a full-up ally, and you're protected by this thing we call Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all. And the alliance is committed if Article 5 is declared, which has to be a unanimous vote, by the way. And then there's partner status. And partners are those like Finland, Sweden, Ukraine, Georgia, who, by the way, all fought and bled right alongside of us in Afghanistan. And the Ukrainian army fought with distinction and valor and honor. And those relationships with the United States military and the other NATO countries runs very deep. I know when I was the deputy representative to NATO, my relationships with the Ukrainian army were quite good and deep. And they're working in a heck of a hard place right now because they don't have that Article 5 protection. And so we, as the West, we should look at them and say, listen, Ukraine has been there for us. Are we so easy to say that, well, we're absolved of this because they're actually not members? Again, this would do nothing but encourage the Putin foreign policy to see what else is available for the taking if we so easily turn our backs on those that fought alongside us in a 20-year war.
What do you say to the skeptics of intervention in Ukraine, whether the intervention is just some sanctions or whether the intervention is actually sending troops who are now ready to deploy, according to the Pentagon? What do you say to those who believe that NATO was all well and good for the Cold War, but after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we don't need NATO anymore. It should have been disbanded decades ago. And what do we care if Russia wants to expand?
So this is what I learned from working at NATO twice, is that while the alliance may not look like it still has relevance today, I would argue that it's the exact opposite of that. If you look at European history, we have 75 years of relative peace, except for the Balkans and a couple of other things. But we're talking about a continent where warfare is a way of life for thousands of years. At the end of World War II, the Bretton Woods plus NATO stand-up has established a place where 3 times a week, whether they like it or not, 28 countries have to sit down and talk to one another. And that always, at the military and diplomatic levels, and this always creates a far better environment where wars can be subverted way in advance. And then when you add in our partners, NATO really is a vehicle to provide peace and stability. There are frustrations about readiness and the ability to respond right away, and some countries have a different operational concept. But we've always muddled along, and we've always been a formidable force. And I think that the world benefits from NATO. Certainly, if it wasn't that way, Vladimir Putin wouldn't have so much interest in bifurcating it and dividing it.
Right. And there's one issue in particular which I want to get to that has seemed to play a large role in these tensions. There's this issue of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It's a pipeline that Russia is trying to build straight into Europe, so they, as far as I understand, don't need to deal with the Ukrainians. This could then open up Ukraine to make it more easier, more convenient to invade. What's the role of oil and natural resources in all of this?
Well, see, this is the reason that, this sounds kind of flippant, but I would say that Vladimir Putin is probably the world's best poker player. He's absolutely playing a pair of twos. And we're not capitalizing on that at the table. If you look, Russia has an 8% inflation rate, just a little bit worse than ours. That's nice. You've got a country that really doesn't do very well unless oil is above $75 a barrel, has a tremendously difficult relationship with one of its natural gas customers in China. And here they are placing all their bets on the fact that Nord Stream 2 is going to be a way to tame NATO, keep Europe dependent on their oil stocks and their natural gas stocks. And even we are now becoming dependent on Russian oil, whereas before we were energy independent. Well, the nice part about the United States is we're unpredictable. Churchill himself said you can always trust America to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. Right. And so when we move to that, this is where I think diplomacy should be at the tip of the spear, is in hitting at his pair of twos or his Achilles heels and say, if you want to be in the global commons, you want to be internationally banked, you want to be able to move your resources on behalf of your people, this nonsense is going to stop. The imperialism stops here. And we should press that in advance of a war. The caution that I have is everybody got to see the horrors of what Afghanistan and the ongoing refugee crisis looks like there. Well, just go ahead and recreate that in Western Europe, because that's exactly what's coming if we see this invasion go forward. But right now, we've got tremendous tools in front of us. We're actually the ones with the full house in our hands. And we just have to go ahead and play the cards and provide American leadership at NATO.
Now, we've got less than a minute or so left. I have to ask before I let you go. You've already sort of answered my first question, which is what you're hoping to see come out of all of these tensions. But now I've got to ask you to put your prediction hat on, knowing the administration, knowing the state of NATO, even in our allies. What do you see most likely to happen in Ukraine?
Well, I fear that we have a possible incursion coming that could actually go as far as the capital. That's my worst fear when we think of most likely, most dangerous. That's the most dangerous, is that Ukraine will fall. But most likely, I think that Vladimir Putin does understand that the international community will probably close ranks after something like that, and that the cost imposition will go up from there. So I think that Lavrov and Putin will probably aim for whatever concessions they can take at this juncture.
Yeah.
And then rinse and repeat. They'll do it all again.
Right.
So I'm a little optimistic that Ukraine gets to have a breather here. But
you've got to look at a longer time scale. Is what that's
you got it.
A little hope for now. A little hope for now, and a little pessimism for the future. General Holt, thank you so much for being here.